Jazakallah. أعوذ بالله من الشيطان الرجيم بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم السلام عليكم ورحمة الله وبركاته. Okay, sure. That introduction was too effusive. I didn't recognize that person. I put my CV through ChatGPT. It came out with something like this. So apologies for that. Okay. So my name is Dr. Musami. I'm a consultant psychiatrist. I'm going to present the results of my PhD. So the challenge I have today is that it took me 2 years to get the funding, 3 years to do the study. I have to present this in 10 minutes, so please bear with me, but I'll go quickly, right? So let's start with what the Quran says about psychosis. So as the last speaker mentioned, you know, there are two very good verses on actually dementia and frailty in the Quran. And as a psychiatrist, I know this very well. The Quran talks about all types of mental health conditions. It also talks about what I would say psychosis, schizophrenia, or generally serious mental illness. And they're very profound verses. I'm not going to go into the depth of all of them, right? But these are verses that I'm sure you all know. They're from Surah Al-Qalam, where the Holy Prophet ﷺ is told that you are not, by the grace of your Lord, afflicted with insanity. بِنِعْمَةِ رَبِّكَ, which means the boon of your Lord. And if we think about this, I think it's important for all of us to think, those of us especially who don't have serious mental illnesses, this is only a blessing from Allah Ta'ala. And it's something when I see patients who are severely unwell, you know, I'm always thinking about, why am I in this chair and the patient in that chair? It's something that we should all reflect on. And so let's just start off with psychosis, or what we know about psychosis. Psychosis is actually a very unspecific term. Most people, when we talk about psychosis, we think about basically what are called positive symptoms of psychosis. So it's one of three symptoms. You're either having hallucinations, delusions, or thought disorder with specific type of confusion. If you have one of those three, you're psychotic, right? You know, or you are experiencing psychosis. But whether that's a psychotic symptom, whether it's a psychotic episode, whether it's a psychotic disorder, is, you know, there's a lot more to tease out from there. There's several domains which are associated with these conditions. I've told you about positive symptoms, there's negative symptoms, mood symptoms, cognitive symptoms, and obviously there's overlap in all of these conditions. In psychiatry, we have something called the nosological problem, which is that we can't essentially define our conditions properly. And everything that we do is based upon our clinical assessment. We have no scans and no blood tests which tell us about our condition. That doesn't mean that it's not a scientific specialty. It just means that it's not a technologically advanced specialty at the moment. And that gives us rise to some very interesting scientific conversations. But what this actually means is that we have several different conditions which are overlap. We can change diagnosis. People drift from one to another. Schizophrenia is the most common psychotic disorder that people will have heard of. And there's certain known risk factors for having psychosis. So being of a minority status, having had past life trauma, particularly in childhood, life stresses, genetics, and drugs such as cannabis and amphetamines play a role. And psychosis, the other reason why it's important to know about this and to think about it, is tends to respond actually quite well to simple medications that we've developed since the 1950s, dopamine 2 receptor blockade. And if we don't identify this and people remain psychotic, then risks can escalate to themselves or others. And so we need to know about this condition. So cannabis is, the formal name is Cannabis sativa. It's been known for thousands of years. We use it for hemp rope as well. But we've been smoking it as a species for a long time. It's basically the flowers or the buds of the flower, which are psychoactive. These were isolated in, I think, the 1960s to two main molecules. One is called THC, the other is CBD. and THC particularly is a psychotomimetic, i.e. it stimulates psychosis-type symptoms. And the reason this is important is that half of my patients with psychosis smoke cannabis. Now, I just want to think biologically about what's going on. THC actually is a CB1 receptor agonist. CB1 receptor is the most widely spread GE protein coupled receptor in the brain. It's extremely widely spread. You can see from these scans about its distribution. It's all over the gray matter. And it doesn't actually regulate a final neurotransmitter like dopamine, right? It actually is presynaptic, so it regulates GABA and glutamate presynaptically. And because it does that, that's why every different person that you speak to will tell you different effects that they get from smoking cannabis or weed. I've done this a lot. There's maybe 50 or 60 different symptoms which are associated with cannabis intoxication. And this is ubiquitous, right? And so what we're doing when we're smoking weed is we are messing up a very tightly and finely regulated system. And this is where this presentation will get to. Now, as I say, 40 or 50% of my patients with psychosis smoke cannabis. And, okay, there's something I'm sure you've all heard of called the self-medication hypothesis. The self-medication hypothesis is the idea that people, if there's an association between a drug and a condition, people might be using the drug in order to help regulate their condition. As a psychiatrist, I'm not going to get into all the debates about this. There's some merit in that, but I've never ever known a person with psychosis who smokes cannabis and gets better. Like, I've never ever known a person who is depressed and drinks alcohol who gets better. It doesn't happen, right? Drugs worsen mental health conditions almost invariably. I think, and you know, the data shows this. So if you use cannabis, your illness onset will be earlier, your relapse will be worse, you'll stay longer in hospital, you'll have more admissions, we'll need more medication. There's something really interesting in the literature that we've known for a long time, that you actually have fewer signs of biological impairment in the cannabis users. So memory performance is better, hippocampal volume is better, there's fewer what they call neurological soft signs. So essentially, I was looking at this to see if there are differences between the patients with psychosis, early psychosis, who use cannabis and who don't use cannabis. So then, of course, you need to collect data from 4 groups. So patients with early psychosis first 5 years, who use cannabis, patients who don't use cannabis, controls who don't use cannabis, and controls who use cannabis. And so essentially I subjected them to a battery of tests, you know, every which way I could measure them. There was some sense to this, which I'm not going, you know, I didn't just choose them at random. I won't go into every detail of why I chose them, but I was looking at structural MRI, MR spectroscopy, functional MRI, eye movements, lots of questionnaires about their mental health status, about their drug use, and collecting lots of data. And so I'm not going to go through all of this slide in detail. The main thing that's important is when you do any of these studies, what you want to see is, are your groups different in age and demographics? Do you need to vary for any confounders? And basically, my cannabis-using patients and non-cannabis using patients were basically the same in terms of diagnosis, in terms of medication, in terms of how long they'd spent in hospital. I mean, there were some things which were expected. Cannabis users, obviously, they drink more and they smoke more than the non-cannabis using compares. Patients in general have a lower IQ than controls. These are things you expect, but we can co-vary for them. It's not major, right? So now the thing is that what I found is over a range of different features, different tests, you know, and different ways of getting at the brain, there were differences between the cannabis-using patients and the non-cannabis-using patients. And these are all related to different aspects of neurobiology. So in terms of, we looked at subcortical shape analysis. So we found that there was increased enlargements of the putamen and the thalamus, which are structures involved in compulsivity in the cannabis users. We found differences in terms of a hyperconnective state in functional connectivity of some important networks, the dorsal attention network and the dorsal attention network connecting to the visual networks. Of particular interest to me is that there was a link between gray matter volume, given that, as I've showed you, CB1 receptor density is very high in gray matter, and the glutamate levels we could measure in the associative striatum. So in cannabis users, but that wasn't seen in non-cannabis users. So that might mean that there are some kind of projections, you know, maybe from the amygdala, hippocampus, projected to the associative striatum, which regulate in cannabis users glutamate in a way that doesn't seem to work in non-cannabis users. So there might be some different neurobiology going on here. And then there's a very old measure of schizophrenia called smooth pursuit eye movements. There's literature that goes back to 1908, which shows that these are impaired in patients with schizophrenia. And what we found is that the patients with who used cannabis didn't show that same deficit. And what that might mean is that cannabis might tip you over the edge, even if you don't have that same biological predisposition to psychosis, schizophrenia. That is that it might be a component in, you might not get the psychosis if you hadn't smoked that weed. So these were important differences. And I mean, I'm not going to go through all of this. I've discussed some of this as well. But overall, there's very good evidence suggesting that there are different pathways, both to and maintaining psychosis for the cannabis and non-cannabis using patients, if we look widely at brain function. And I think the most important thing that I want to get across here is that the brain is a very tightly regulated system. Our cognition, our language, our facilities, we take these all for granted, but it's very tightly regulated. If we undertake, drugs, cannabis, amphetamines, alcohol, we're essentially disrupting that tight balance. Your brain is your most precious asset. Please look after it. Okay, thank you.